Why the Nazis feared gay men more than you think. In the years leading up to the Second World War, Germany entered a period of rapid political transformation that would alter the lives of millions. Among the communities most deeply affected were gay men, who had long lived under a complicated balance of cultural expression and legal restriction. Early 20th century Germany was home to one of the world's first organized movements advocating for the rights of homosexuals. And cities like Berlin fostered vibrant LGBTQ spaces despite the existence of paragraph 175, a law criminalizing male same-gender relationships. But when the Nazi Party rose to power in 1933, everything shifted. What had once been social tension and political rhetoric hardened into focused state persecution. Suddenly, an entire community found itself targeted, monitored, and dehumanized under a regime determined to eliminate anything that challenged its ideology. Tonight, we examine how this machinery of control unfolded and the chilling impact it had on the lives of gay men in Nazi Germany. Yet beneath these progressive currents remained the shadow of paragraph 175, the legal foundation that criminalized male same-gender intimacy. For activists, overturning this law was a central mission. For extremists, however, it became a tool they believed could reshape society. When the economic collapse of 1929 destabilized the nation, the early gay rights movement lost momentum just as radical politics surged. Within this turmoil, the Nazi Party saw an opportunity. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, they inherited not only a fractured society, but also a legal instrument they could weaponize. They viewed homosexuality not as a private matter, but as a threat to their vision of a disciplined, obedient population. In their eyes, any deviation from the roles they prescribed for citizens weakened the supposed unity of the nation. Their rhetoric tied homosexuality to conspiracies and moral decline, intertwining bigotry with nationalistic propaganda. Immediately, the new regime began dismantling LGBTQ cultural spaces. Bars, clubs, and social venues in major cities fell under police scrutiny. Establishments that had once been places of community and safety became targets. Visibility itself became dangerous. From the activists who had publicly campaigned for reform to the ordinary men who simply enjoyed companionship, no one was exempt from suspicion. In the early years, enforcement varied widely. In some smaller towns, individuals could still live quietly if they drew no attention. Many believed the regime would fade, or that its harshest measures would never reach them. But these hopes dissolved in 1935 when the Nazis expanded paragraph 175, broadening its definitions and criminalizing even perceived intentions rather than actions. What had once been a law applied in limited circumstances became an instrument of mass prosecution. This shift coincided with the aftermath of one of the regime's most pivotal events, the Night of the Long Knives. While the purge was fundamentally about consolidating power and eliminating internal rivals, it carried a specific resonance for gay men. Ernst Röhm, a high-ranking Nazi and head of the SA, was openly homosexual. His execution, alongside other SA officials accused of similar conduct, became a symbolic warning. The regime used these deaths not only to secure political control, but also to declare that homosexuality had no place in the new order. Following Röhm's removal, Heinrich Himmler rose to unparalleled authority within the policing structure. As head of the SS, the Gestapo, and the concentration camp system, he held immense power, and his views on homosexuality were extreme. Under his leadership, persecution intensified dramatically. What began as raids and closures evolved into a systematized campaign targeting gay men throughout Germany and occupied territories. By 1936, Himmler's office established a central authority dedicated to identifying and prosecuting homosexuals. 2 years later, nationwide lists were demanded. Surveillance increased to levels that intruded deeply into private lives. Police monitored meeting places, intercepted correspondence, and watched homes. A simple change of address had to be reported, creating a system where vanishing quietly was nearly impossible. Yet, despite the vast machinery behind this persecution, the judicial system was unprepared. Courts were overwhelmed by cases that were nearly impossible to prove under traditional legal standards. Evidence was scarce, accusations were often baseless, and the entire process strained the already rigid Nazi bureaucracy. Still, the regime persisted. Police forces, lacking clear guidance, often resorted to sweeping dragnets. Reports from the era describe groups of young men hauled into interrogation rooms, questioned aggressively, and pressured into confessions. The psychological pressure on the community grew immense. Rumors spread quickly. A neighbor's accusation could lead to arrest. A former acquaintance could become a threat. In cities that had once been celebrated for openness and cultural energy, silence became a matter of survival. As persecution deepened, thousands of gay men were arrested and charged under the revised paragraph 175. Many were imprisoned. Others were sent to concentration camps, where they were segregated and subjected to uniquely harsh treatment. In the eyes of the regime, these men represented a fundamental ideological challenge, a challenge they sought to eliminate entirely. The Nazi campaign against gay men was not merely legal or administrative. It was ideological, designed to reshape the very identity of society. The regime framed gay men as enemies from within, portraying them as a threat to national strength. This rhetoric justified the sweeping arrests, the surveillance, and the relentless targeting. What makes this period particularly haunting is the way everyday life transformed. Ordinary routines became dangerous. Social networks dissolved. Communities that once thrived in the open retreated into fear. The Nazis did not simply seek to punish, they sought to erase, to silence, and to extinguish entire networks of people whose only crime was living authentically. By the time the regime reached the peak of its power, an estimated 95,000 men had been arrested. Families were torn apart, relationships destroyed, and cultural movements extinguished. The full human cost is difficult to measure, but its trauma echoes through history as one of the darkest chapters in the long struggle for LGBTQ rights. The persecution of gay men under Nazi rule stands as a stark reminder of how quickly a society can turn against its own citizens when intolerance is elevated into policy. What began as political rhetoric escalated into a national campaign of fear, surveillance, and state-driven cruelty. Germany's early LGBTQ movement, once a symbol of progress, was crushed under the weight of authoritarian ideology. Remembering this history is vital, not only to honor those who suffered, but to recognize the warning signs when intolerance becomes a tool of power. The story of these men is one of resilience and loss, of lives interrupted by a regime determined to control even the most personal aspects of human identity. Their experiences remind us that rights, dignity, and freedom must always be defended, especially in times of political uncertainty.